Ollie here, and this is my review of The Seeds of Doom, the sixth and final story of the 13th season of classic Doctor Who, starring Tom Baker as the fourth Doctor. The Seeds of Doom is the 85th story overall, it's 6 parts long, and it's written by Robert Banks Stewart. So the plot of The Seeds of Doom is as follows. When scientists unearth 2 seed pods deep in the Arctic permafrost, the Doctor and Sarah Jane rush to investigate. Soon the Doctor's fears are confirmed. The pods house crinoids, one of the most parasitic and dangerous life forms in the universe. One of the creatures has already infected the scientist, and now a hideous monster is rampaging through the base, intent on total destruction. When the second pod is stolen amidst the escalating carnage, it is transported into the hands of insane botanist Harrison Chase. From his mansion in England, the plant-obsessed Chase will allow the pod to split open. Both the ruthless millionaire and the rapidly growing carnivorous crinoid are intent on infecting and destroying our entire world. So that is the plot of The Seeds of Doom. It is a great story. It does show up in many of Tom Baker's very best stories, usually in the top 10. I can see why, but the very slow start of the story, plus its pacing, pretty much puts The Seeds of Doom in my top 15/top 20 stories in the Tom Baker era. To put long story short, I think The Seeds of Doom is a little bit overrated. I do commend its production though, and it was very well done. I like how Antarctica was represented by painting Okori completely white and adding snow effects as well. The other location filming, such as the huge garden and other places in Chase's mansion, was very nice as well. It looked very much like your average bad guy's mansion. And I also like the special effects the story has, such as the makeup when the vegetation completely grows over the human body once it comes into contact with the crinoid seed pods, and obviously the crinoid pretty much grows, and I liked how he was able to grow, and I liked how I think one of the scenes where you actually see the giant crinoid just all over Chase's house. It was just pretty much just towering over. It was really scary as well, and obviously, as I mentioned before, I think the makeup that was used for the body pretty much being under control of the crinoid looked really good as well. It looked very scary. Anyway, the scripts were very good. The direction by Douglas Camfield was very good as well. The Seeds of Doom was very good as well. Obviously taking inspiration from an old 50s movie called The Thing from Another World. It was pretty much very evident especially in the first 2 parts, because I think The Thing from Another World pretty much was set in Antarctica as well, and snow based in Antarctica, and obviously Doctor Who in this story did it as well, and I think the X-Files actually did the whole Thing from Another World inspiration as well. And I think that aspect of the whole seed pod thing, that was actually an deadly alien plant creature. That was also from Thing from Another World. I think that aspect was covered really well in this story. But I do think the pacing of this story was pretty much didn't really do the plot justice, in my opinion. Part 1, I think it was a very slow start. I mean, it had great dialogue. I understand they were slowly trying to build it up. I think it was a bit too slow, in my opinion. In parts 2 and 3, I think that was a major improvement to part 1. I think the momentum pretty much died in part 4, and I think nothing really much happened in part 4 because obviously it carried off from a big cliffhanger from when Sarah Jane was about to be exposed to the crinoid seed pod, but the Doctor pretty much rescued her on time, and then the two are able to escape for a bit, and then the Doctor pretty much gets captured by Scorby, and then is waiting to be put in Harrison Chase's compost machine, while Sarah Jane is pretty much all over the house trying to look for the Doctor, and I think she comes across Emilia Duke. No, another point. Sorry, a character I think is quite pointless, and I'll explain why I think so in a bit. And plus, I think who was it? I think it was Winlet. No, not Winlet. Let me check here. Yeah, I think it was Keeler, not Winlet. I think Winlet was infected earlier. Yeah, Keeler, he got infected by the seed pod, and it's pretty much Harrison Chase pretty much just keeping him hostage there, and pretty much just giving him more meat and stuff like that. And it wasn't really done as well. But part 5 and I think the last 2 parts were paced better than part 4, to say the least. So I think the story could have pretty much done without 2 parts, to say the least. And the Seeds of Doom is actually a very dark story as well. Not as dark as the Brain of Morbius, but this story does have a lot of grim moments and a lot of grim deaths, the grim gory deaths. A lot of characters do die, and they're pretty much, and as I mentioned like a few seconds ago, their deaths are pretty gory, especially from if they're not being choked out by the Crinoid, they're pretty much hacked to pieces by Chase's compost machine, which actually Harrison Chase suffers the same fate himself. So that was a pretty gnarly scene, to say the least. The Seeds of Doom does have its memorable moments, especially the part 3 cliffhanger in which Sarah Jane was pinned down by, I think it was Scorby and some of his, sorry, I think, no, it was Harrison Chase's guards were pretty much pinning her down, and there was a Crinoid seed pod literally just about to like explode right next to her, and then obviously the part 5 cliffhanger when the Doctor, Sarah, Scorby, and Sergeant Henderson from Unit were locked outside by Chase, and a huge Crinoid was just towering over them. And I also like Harrison Chase's death scene when he was sucked into his own compost machine. That was pretty gnarly to watch as well, but it was still pretty cool to see. I also found the ending of the story cute, especially when the Doctor and Sarah pretty much had saved the day, and then the Doctor pretty much agrees to take Sarah Jane on a holiday, but they end up in Antarctica, and then the two are like, have you been here before, or what are we yet to come? So I actually found it pretty cute and quite funny as well to watch. So on to the performances of the story, which are actually one of the main highlights of the story. Tom Baker, he was brilliant as always, and he's definitely more serious here than he was in other stories, and especially warning Scorby about the dangers of the Crinoid. And I think he was actually yelling at some point. I don't think we really heard the Fourth Doctor yell. Yell when the situation actually called for it, and then when the situation actually had to call for it in a serious occasion. I'm not really counting when the Doctor's like, Harry Sullivan is an imbecile in Revenge of the Seven, because that was just mainly used for comedy. I think the Doctor is very serious here, and the Doctor does have some great stuff to do himself. I really like the part in where he was tied up by Scorby and how he escaped. He pretty much had to he was still in bondage. He pretty much had to hop to a overhead hanging lantern, and then pretty much use his head to knock it off to break the glass so he can free himself. And you also like the part when he snapped Scorby's neck in part 3, which was unexpected, and I actually thought he died, but Scorby was only stunned for a few minutes. And I think this part when the Doctor snapped Scorby's neck was taken out of context. It was pretty much used to point out how violent Doctor Who was getting, and I think The Seeds of Doom was pretty much one of the more violent Doctor Who stories at this point because of its violent deaths, and I think it was criticized because the Doctor asked Scorby to make a Molotov cocktail, which was quite funny. I think Mary Whitehouse didn't really like that, so I think this will pretty much led to Philip Hinchcliffe losing his job at the end of the next season. Elizabeth Sladen was great as well as Sarah Jane. She gets to do her own work here, even though she does get captured a few times in the story. And as I mentioned before, it pretty much contributes to making her character weaker, more prone to danger than she was in previous stories. But I did like her uneasy association with Scorby, and they were pretty much at the opposite sides of each other. Even though Scorby actually wanted to defeat the Crinoid after seeing how dangerous it was, and then I think he started doubting the Doctor if he can actually defeat the Crinoid, but then that eventually led to his own death, and that was a pretty nice scene. And also like the scene where Sarah Jane was talking to the Doctor over the phone when the Doctor was able to make it to the World Ecology Bureau, and then the Doctor was asking her about Scorby, and then Sarah was like, "We're uneasy allies." And that was a nice little funny scene. Pardon me. And I also liked the scene. I also liked the beginning in part 1 when she was able to convince Mobley to go through with the surgery on Winlet. And that was a nice, good scene. I think Elizabeth Sladen really acted that scene really well. Unit appears, but without any of the main unit members like the Brigadier or Benton. The Brig is once again in Geneva, and Benton's not mentioned at all, which pretty much makes us think that he didn't actually survive the events of the android invasion. And this is also the last time units will ever appear until season 26's Battlefield. So unit get to kick ass here, and they'll pretty much defeat the Crinoids by pretty much getting the RAF, I think, and then they're pretty much just dropping missiles on the Crinoid, which pretty much killed it. So they do get to kick ass in this story, but even though the main unit family members are absent. The side casts, I think they were all very good, even though I do think some characters were unneeded. First off, we had Scorby. He was a thug hired by Chase to recover the seed pod from Antarctica and destroy the scientific base of a bomb. He was pretty much working with Chase to help capture the Doctor and Sarah a few times, but before realizing how dangerous the Crinoids were, and decided to ally himself with the Doctor and Sarah to defeat the Crinoids. But he later started to doubt the Doctor's ability to if he can actually defeat the Crinoids, and pretty much decided to take the coward's way out. And well, not necessarily the coward's way. He pretty much decided to make a run for it, and was later drowned thanks to the plants that were controlled by the Crinoids. I think Scorby was a great character, and I think he's one of my favorite brutes from Doctor Who. And I actually do wish he got to live to the end. And to be honest, I think he could have made a brilliant companion for some odd reason. I think he'd have had some moments of conflict with the Doctor. I think that would have pretty much worked, and yeah, and it would have been very nice as well. But hey, at least nothing really worked out in the end. And we also had Keeler. He was the botanist that Chase had employed, and he accompanied Scorby to retrieve the Crinoid pods. He was very concerned about the pods, and later became infected by the Crinoid pod when the pods came into contact with him, and he was later transformed into a Crinoid. He was a good character. We had John Stevenson. He was another botanist, but he was on the expedition that he was on the Antarctica expedition to get to look at the Crinoid pod, and then obviously he helped the Doctor to try and get rid of Scorby and Keeler, but then obviously he was later killed by I think he was later killed by Winlet, who was transformed into a Crinoid. And as soon as Stevenson was about to get help to try and help out the situation. And we also had Winlet. He was a scientist on the expedition as well, and he later killed Moby and Stevenson and himself, and Winlet himself was destroyed by the bomb blast that Scorby caused. And we also had Mobley. He was the zoologist that assisted Winlet and Stevenson on the expedition. He was killed by Winlet at the end of part 1, just as he was about to perform an operation, thanks to Sarah Jane's, after he was convinced by Sarah Jane to actually continue with the operation, to proceed with the operation and remove the infection from the Crinoids. So I think he was an okay character. We also had Dunbar. He worked for the World Ecology Bureau and briefed the Doctor about the Crinoid pod. And he later sold information about the Crinoid pods to Harrison Chase, and he later regretted doing this and tried to warn Harrison Chase about the dangers of the seed pod, but then he later ended up getting killed by a Crinoid himself. We also had Sir Colin Thackeray. He was the head of the World Ecology Bureau, and he was warned by the Doctor regarding chasing the Crinoid and contacted the unit to fight the Crinoid. And we also have Emilia Duke. She was said to have been one of the world's leading flower artists, and she actually went to Chase to demand payment from a painting that he paid for, but he never actually paid him. And it was later revealed that she was actually doing this because she was pretty much working for Sir Colin as well, and then later told Sir Colin about the Doctor and Sarah being in Chase's house and the danger and how they were in danger as well. She was an okay-ish character, but I actually found her rather irrelevant because I think she was just there for filler purposes, and I do agree with Hinchcliffe for saying that she was just a filler character. And we also had Major Beresford. He was put in charge of UNIT when the brig was away in Geneva and called in the RAF to destroy the Crinoid. For someone who's supposed to be like a stand-in for the Brigadier, I actually think he could have done a bit more in this story, to say the least. On to our villains. First off, we have our big bad Harrison Chase. He was a millionaire with a fascination of botany and collected a lot of plants and pretty much had a disdain for the human race. He was fascinated with the Crinoids and pretty much told anyone that he should not be harmed in any form. He tried to kill the Doctor and Sarah Jane on many occasions, especially with his compost machine that pretty much juices anyone that goes through it, and he uses the remains to feed his plants. And then he was actually killed by the same machine that he used to raise hell. He was a great villain, and he was acted very well, and I think he was very much like a James Bond villain, especially with his black gloves. Doesn't pretty much make him out to be like a murderer or something like that. And I would say he's definitely one of the highlights of the story. And on to our other villain, the Crinoid, a large carnivorous plant-like alien that turns any living flesh onto their very own. It can grow very large very quickly, and I think the doctor mentioned that it can pretty much grow to the size of St. Paul's Cathedral in minutes. The Crinoids can cope with the coldness of deep space, but snow slowed them down, which actually made no sense to me. The Crinoid is actually the Crinoid is actually an axon from season 8 painted green. It was still effective, and actually, with the Crinoid itself, pretty much fits in with the gothic nature of the Philip Hinchcliffe era, especially with the body horror that it causes its victims to go through when it comes into contact with the Crinoid. And that was a pretty cool villain as well. I do hope the Crinoid actually do return to Doctor Who at some point in the future. So, on to the fault of the Seeds of Doom. As I mentioned before, I think the pacing was not as good as it's made out to be. Part 1 I actually found very slow. It pretty much put me off any rewatches that I had tried to do in the past. But I think this time I was able to watch it full for the first time. I watched it for the first time about 2 years ago. And I think that pretty much deterred me from doing that. And as I said before, I think Emilia Duke was just a failure character and just mere plot convenience to try and make the plot go forward. I think another way could have been done to actually do that. And I do think Eunice should have played a bigger part in the story, especially now that I understand this is probably their last appearance. No, this was their last appearance. And I do think that they could have actually done a lot more, for that, so they can have like a decent send off, because they've been pretty much a part of Doctor Who since the 60s, well, late 60s. So it would have been nice to have at least had a nice little moment with units where they pretty much took over and they did actually take over and save the day, but I do wish they were introduced a little bit earlier so they can actually go ahead and kick ass as they should have done. So to conclude, I think The Seeds of Doom is a great story that has great production values, plus the scare factor to back it up, but overall I do feel the story could have done with 2 parts less to try and loosen up the padding, so I give The Seeds of Doom an 8 out of 10. So that wraps up my reviews for season 13. Join me next time as I review all 6 stories of this season. Thank you for watching this review. Please let me know your thoughts of The Seeds of Doom and this review itself. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel and join my Discord server if you want to. And the link is in the description box below. Until then, see you later.